My first son, Max, was born in May of 2016. My spouse had had a C-section due to some complications with the delivery, so we were slated to be in the hospital for a week or so, and I had a lot of time on my hands because they were both sleeping for most of the day. After cruising around the internet for a while, I decided that I would see what was happening in that old game of my childhood, Gemstone. And I tooled around for a while, but I lost interest pretty quickly. I didn't have anything that I felt tethered me to the game other than nostalgia. None of the people that I knew from decades ago were still around, and my old characters felt unfamiliar to me. Kind of strange. And besides, I was busy being a new dad, so I shut it down and I moved on, and I was chasing my babbling, strawberry blonde-haired baby around the house. My second son, Miles, came a little less than 2 years later. And this time, again, we were in the hospital for a week, and again, I had time on my hands. So, again, I fired up Gemstone, thinking that I'd try to start from scratch and see if anything stuck this time. I knew then that I wanted to make a bard because I had never made a bard before. And I fired up the character creator, chose some stats and skills, and then I stared at the name selection screen for a while. I have always agonized over choosing a name for a Gemstone character. When I was a teenager playing back in the 90s, all of my characters' names were just bastardized versions of a character I'd read in a fantasy novel or played in a video game. But I wanted this time to be different. So as I looked around the room for help, my eyes settled on the newborn, sleeping peacefully in his crib, and I thought of my sons, Miles and Max. And thus, Milax was born. Right after Miles, and I guess nearly 2 years after Max. And this time, the character felt like somebody I could stick with. Names are powerful, magical. They're how we practice the mysterious alchemy of transforming the unknown into the known. And in a text-based game, built around characters, names are everything. I wanted to build an episode about names, and it ended up being a lot bigger than I could fit into one piece, so there'll be a few parts to this that I'll share as I finish them. In today's episode, we'll talk about names in Gemstone, how some players decided to name their own characters, and how much of Elysia itself was built, ordered, and named. And before we begin, I also want to apologize for my hiatus. I've had some distractions that have kept me away from the game and from working on this podcast for a while now, and I felt pretty bad for the folks who kept asking when I'd come back and when I'd be working on it again. I'm trying to get back in the swing of things, so thank you for your support. It means a lot, and it feels good to be back. So, welcome to the 10th episode of Town Square Central. Up first today, we're going to hear from Erek and Elysia, two former GMs who were deeply involved in the process of shepherding the game from the Ice Age to AOL. They were on the team that renamed the world as it existed and built the new world when it needed to grow. Alright, so first, why don't you all briefly introduce yourselves?
I'll start. So hi, I play Erek in Gemstone. I have been playing Erek since early 1992 was when I rolled the character. My history with Gemstone, though, starts earlier than that, in probably first half of 1988 when Gemstone 2 opened on Genie. I played for a little while, maybe 4 to 6 months, but I was 2 years out of high school at the time, so I couldn't afford to pay Genie's bills, so I got off it pretty quick, but then rejoined the product back in 92 when I actually had a job. So I've been going for a while. About 2 years after that, though, so early 94, late 93-ish, I joined the product as a game master. I was an assistant game master under Fawn, who then later became the product manager, and kind of cut my teeth with such luminaries as Kygar, who was Roger. He was one of the game masters that started the original base creature system of humanoids back in the day, and he taught me a lot about how creature AI was to be built, and how you could actually build a fun, interesting NPC monster that did some things that people hated, like grab your weapons when you died and things like that.
So you're the one that we can point to.
Yeah, well, really, Roger back then. But so and then I went on to eventually became a senior game master over sort of technical game systems, ultimately doing some lead design work on really anything technical. So all the creature combat systems, the game systems, and so forth, as we grew out of Genie and into the Unix product, and then the AOL launch, and then on through to Simutronics Web launch, and then I left the product as a game master. When was that? Late 90? I'm sorry, 2001, 2002 ish. And Elysia stayed on, and then we decided. Really, I kind of got her back interested in it in 2017 when I just as on a lark said, well, it's been 20 years since we moved to the web. What's the game like? And loaded it up and relaunched the client, and she's walking by my desk and says, is that Gemstone? And then we jumped back into it. So it was a long hiatus there, and I'm sure a lot of people have had them too. But it's been a really interesting sort of a revitalization back to where we started with the game, because it's a really neat journey to go on throughout. Just kind of taking a thought back to early 90s to what the game became today is a very different product, but at its core kind of the same, meaning you've got this fiction engine. We used to call it interactive fiction engine, IFE, is still the core product as it was back then, but the people that work on it kind of build the story along with the players, and together you can be part of this epic tale and shape it. And that's what really sort of makes Gemstone a great product. I met Elysia in person in 1997 at SimuCon, and it was sort of this the classic love at first sight kind of tale. But I didn't know her other than somebody that worked on for AOL Games Channel at the time, and she was doing some testing for us to get AOL the product launched over there. So I'll let her kind of talk about that part, because I've been talking too much.
Yeah, he's the bubbly pixie.
Wait. Well, he's the what now?
Bubbly pixie.
Okay.
I'm very much like my character in that I tend to ramble and talk a lot. So.
All right, I just wanted to make sure that I correctly heard you say bubbly pixie.
Bubbly pixie, yeah.
Got it.
So my character's name is Elysia. She's not my first character there. I tried it, I want to say 94-ish, just to see what it was. Then, as Erek noted, I was also working for AOL at the time and started testing for them because we learned that they were going to take on the product. So, and Alanka was recruiting me to be a game master at the same time. So I probably played for, I don't know, several different characters for probably a year and a half. Became a GM, met Erek in 97, and got married and had a baby and all those good things. I was on staff for 7-8 years, something like that. Started as an AGM working on Bard spells. Added about, 10 or so spells to the Bard Circle, which was woefully incomplete at the time. Many circles were. It was fun to come back and see so many of them finished, because even when we left in the early 2000s, there were still a lot that weren't done. Gradually migrated into running events, which the events program really kind of got started in 97, 98 with Evans Gate and a bunch of others after that. And did a whole ton of world building, because one thing that we discovered when the doors opened on AOL was that lots and lots of people liked to play Gemstone, and we didn't have room for them. So
right.
there was an enormous amount of behind the scenes work that had to take place just to have the infrastructure to handle all the people. The overcrowding was extreme, and the landing was full of people, and they would fight and misbehave just because of just sheer overcrowding. Before that, like literally there was one alleyway, for example. So when you came out of the character generator with a new character, you landed there, and whenever AOL would put Gemstone on the front login page, there would be hundreds of people in there.
That's how I got into the game.
I mean, yeah, like hundreds of people for, the hour or so that we were on the front page. It was kind of crazy. So one of the things that had to happen was loads of alleys got built, just duplicate alley rooms. And so everybody would get their own.
Just streaming out of alleys.
Yes. Everybody had their own little space. So there was a lot of work. Hunting areas were enlarged. Just lots and lots of behind-the-scenes work was done in those years. And also we were tasked with making the game bigger, because at the time we had the landing. So Icefield Trace was added, Soul Haven was added, River's Rest was added, Terrace was added. Eventually we got over to Elven Nations, so we built the Dwarven places under the mountain, and we built a couple of Elven cities and a bunch of hunting over there. So most of our time in Gemstone was focused on making things more robust, shoring them up, making them bigger, making space for everyone. Back at that time in 98, 99, we had a 3,000 person cap. That was like physically what the game could manage. And we would regularly hit it during really popular times, like say the Juggernaut came to town or whatever. And then on a normal primetime night where East Coast people were still awake and West Coast people were home from work, it would be, anywhere from 1,800 to 2,500, depending on what night of the week it was and what was going on. So there were a lot of y'all.
Yeah.
Many. So many.
Yeah.
Anyway, eventually life caught up with me, and I needed to quit GMing to take care of family and stuff. And so we were gone for about 15 years. And then, like Erek said, in 2017, through Facebook, because I'm not on Facebook, but he is, and he was in a Gemstone group, and somebody posted a comeback for the 20th web anniversary ad, and he decided he was going to go look. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm going to go look. And it took him like a month to convince me to come back, but then I did, and I'm glad I did, because I caught up with some old friends, and I've had a lot of fun playing over the last couple of years. It's nostalgic in a lot of ways, and at first it was really weird because it's very hard when you've worked on something for, the better part of a decade to sort of mentally divorce yourself from the work. I know that may sound weird, but I was worried that I would come back and I would just feel like look around and go, oh my God, I need to fix that. I need to take care of that. I need to submit that. I need to do something with that. And I did at first, but I got over it pretty quick. It's kind of awesome.
No, I know exactly the feeling you're talking about. It can be really tough to let go of something you've made, or to watch it change, I guess.
Because during the time that we worked on Gemstone, everything had to change. We lost the Iron Crown license, and were given very little time to rename everything that was copyrighted. And so renaming was something that could happen fairly quickly. Rewriting history took a lot more time, and so we spent years doing that. At the same time, as much as I poured into it and other GMs poured into it, I mean, it belongs to Simutronics. I don't feel that level of possessiveness towards it, if that makes sense. It's fun to see it evolve. It's fun to see things change. It's fun to see GMs run storylines and morph something into the next stage of its existence. Then none of that bothers me much at all.
So we're talking a lot about sort of this move to AOL, but it's important. We should probably go back and talk about historically what that really meant.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I will say, when I heard people talk about the Ice Age in Gemstone, I thought that it was like a storyline movement. You know. Like, So let's talk about what we mean when we actually say Ice Age.
So ICE actually stands for Iron Crown Enterprises, and Iron Crown Enterprises was a company a lot like Wizards of the Coast. Forgotten Realms is an IP that Wizards of the Coast owns, right? We're all familiar with Forgotten Realms. Shadow World was an IP that Iron Crown Enterprises wrote and owned, and Gemstone was we licensed it, and Gemstone was built on Shadow World lore. So a lot of the places in the game prior to de-icing were literally lifted and rebuilt inside of Gemstone. Not always exactly identically and stuff. I mean, obviously, sometimes things need to morph, but everything from combat and metals and to places and names of things and names of herbs and names of everything, right? All of that stuff came from Shadow World. And what Erek is alluding to when he says AOL was a big deal was that AOL was the kind of the proximate cause of losing that license.
Yeah. So when Genie launched in 90, that's when that contract became into effect, that Iron Crown Enterprise. But and it's more than just the world. The Rollmaster games system was also implemented in Gemstone, which was a 20-level game, by the way. So that's a whole other podcast. But the growing pains of getting out of a 20-level game. So Shadow World had been going for a few years. Simutronics had a license to use that source material on Genie, and then later got that extended to Prodigy. So when we all became GMs, we got a whole box, like I still have it, of all of the Iron Crown Enterprise source material, Shadow World, Rollmaster, all of it. So it's really a trip to go look at my bookcase and see all this stuff. But so we had been building the AOL. Well, we built the Unix engine with intent to go to AOL, starting way back in 94, 95.
But it had to have been 94. Yeah.
Yeah. So, because that's when you started on it. So we had been building this Unix engine with intent to go to AOL, and did all of our testing, did all of our upscale work and everything to get onto the to AOL's system and interface with it. Not 2 weeks before we were supposed to go live, Iron Crown woke up and told David, well, you can't use our licensed material on AOL. You don't have a contract for it, and wanted to pull the contract or basically stop the launch. And so David was stuck. And I remember him telling this story in one of the later Simucons, basically saying it as he doesn't understand why Iron Crown didn't want to make money, because as it turns out, 5 or 6 years later, they filed for bankruptcy. So we had to scramble. We either had to delay launch, which with AOL you just didn't do. We had advertising material up. AOL was banking on this new product and everything else, and so we had a GM meeting and an all staff meeting 2 weeks prior to launch. That the subject of was, we have to change every reference to Iron Crown source material to our own IP in 2 weeks. Now, luckily, David had some resemblance of an IP, because the original Gemstone 2 back in 87, 88, all the way up to 90 was Elanthia. Now, it didn't have a lot of built content, but he at least had something he could go back to. So we had to re-architect all of the source material, at least in terms of what players would see from a name and dictionary standpoint, in 2 weeks, which included all the material names, the pantheon, location names, references to characters that would have been in Iron Crown source material, the whole bit. Which that was tough, because we basically literally had to just throw names out there, and you have to be really careful about it, because recall we've got that whole 15-15-15 article adjective noun system for a short name. That's been there forever, and it still is, right? So if you go change a base material name and need to do something like global search and replace in your entire database, you don't want to change the size of the text too much, because you could cause yourself a problem. And so for every name that we had to at least at as much as we could make it either the same number of characters or less.
I was looking over the list of Ice Age materials, and I was wondering why so many of them were so similar.
Yeah.
Now you know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, because
Well, there was those two reasons, right? One was we had no time.
Yeah,
we had 2 weeks only to get all of those renamed, and the second one was we couldn't create work for ourselves to have to go, because anytime you'd have to go back and touch that item if a global search and replace caused a problem with the size, right? So I'm sure in some cases some things got truncated, because I do know at least in one case where a material got one letter larger. It's probably Schalk to Voltite, I think, was one or two letters larger, and there's a couple other instances.
I'm looking at the list right now, and most of these changes are things like Lane. I don't know how to pronounce it. Lane.
Yeah, you had it.
Lane.
Yeah.
Became
Lane to
Mean, which became Glaeus, and like
Yeah.
Eog became Horus, and these things seem logical, and like I can see how you got from point A to point B. But some of them, like, this is my favorite. I'm gonna give you my second favorite first. Okay, my second favorite is Ithilnar. Ithilnar. Do you know what Ithilnar became? Do you remember? I'm gonna be really impressed if you do. It's a metal. These are all metals.
It became Valorn.
That's right. Yeah. Which is not at all like it.
No. I don't know why that.
My favorite is the old metal McGrail, which became. Do you know? McGrail became Urglace.
Oh, that's very different.
Yeah. What?
Anyway, I have to say our name is slightly better than
McGrail. Like that was clearly named for like someone's cousin who wanted his middle name put in the game or something like that.
We offered some interesting opportunities though, because if I recall, we made a significant change. High Elf became Dark Elf. Yes. And so we offered, and as a matter of fact, I think the original Erek in '92 was a half elf. And we offered a race change to anyone, and that's when I moved Erek to Sylvankine. But there were some instances where I'm like, why on earth would we have to make this change? Like, for instance, Mage. Mage is not a copyrighted name.
Right.
But yet we had to change it. And I remember even at the time thinking, why on earth are we changing Mage? But Healer to Empath to there were some things where I'm like, are we really have to do this?
Why do we have to change this one? But
but Bard didn't change. Yeah, so the original professions were Fighter, Thief, Bard, Healer, Mage, Sorcerer, Ranger, and Cleric. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, Fighter, Thief, Healer, and Mage all got changed.
Yeah, I don't know why. Didn't. It's possible that it could have been named in the contract. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
I will say two changes that I do not like. I do not like that the statistic that we now think of as logic used to be eloquence, which I just like a lot more.
Yes.
I like that a lot more. And I really prefer the old name for human, which was just common man.
Yeah.
I'd love to see, like, you see Milax. He is a common man.
He's a common man.
I really like that a lot.
If you want to talk about origin of names, she had her hand in almost every name that existed east of the Spine.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to talk the Elven nations. The only other things I want to say about the old Ice Age names that I miss, Schalk is definitely better than Voltite. It just is.
Yes.
Veil Iron, cool name. Star Iron, cooler name.
Yeah.
Just saying. So okay. So Elven nations, talk about going from only living in the landing to leading this, or only having the landing for players to be in, to leading the design and the work on the Elven nations.
Well, the original town obviously was Calforce, which became Windwar's Landing. It's a melting pot. It still is a melting pot. It's kind of everybody's home. And it was a great place to start. As we grew in terms of population, the strain was big time. It really affected people. Just always crowded and always a lot of scroll, always a lot of stress around players trying to use systems built to accommodate as many people as were there. So pretty quickly, attention shifted to building more things. Icefield Trace was built, and the GM that led that build loved halflings, and so they built a halfling town up in the snow, and it was great. Far enough away that it felt like its own separate place, but not so far that older characters couldn't walk up there and help people that needed help and rescue and whatever else. Next came Soulhaven. I'm kind of skipping over Terrace because Terrace was the first.
It was already built.
Yeah, it was kind of already built. It was just kind of renamed and converted, and the dwarf stuff was highlighted because
the one thing to point out, actually, there's two things to interject. I'm sorry, is before Terrace, we didn't have anything like multiple banks.
Yeah.
All the banks and the fact that the amulet network, the ThoughtNet, was localized. None of that happened, so we had to go build all that, which allowed us to build all these other towns. But the other thing I wanted to point out before you continue is the one other thing that was major that we lost when we lost the Iron Crown content is we had no geography.
Yep.
So the only thing that we could do would be to understand where things were relative to each other. So, well, gee, I leave the landing and I go south for a while and I end up in this other place. And so very quickly we had to figure out what our geography was going to look like. And if you go all the way back to '96, I built this horrible map of the west of the spine, which included some of what we had built. But it was like this topographical map of Australia that I'd put on its side, and it was a very, very close up satellite map. And so when you look at it, you can't really tell what it is. But as we started to plan Elven Nations, we had to think about what our continent would look like, and that turned into Elenith, the continent. But anyway, so you were talking about
wait. Before we come back to that,
yeah,
I am supposed to ask you, Eric, about the Sea of Fire.
So, yeah, the Sea of Fire exists only because there was a flat area.
Yes.
In that weird satellite topographical map that I adapted to the western coastline, and I needed something to put there.
So in 1997. He cut, we had the landing, we had Terrace, which we knew was across some piece of ocean on an island. We had Ice Mule, which we knew was north of the landing, right? You go north to get to Ice Mule. We knew players didn't know Solhaven was coming, but we knew Solhaven was coming, and we knew Solhaven was south of the landing. And like he said, he had sort of tried to mock up a rudimentary map so he could keep straight in his brain, like where the hunting areas associated with Ice Mule and the landing were in relation to those towns and stuff, right? Well, by 97, we realized we needed to do a lot more. We needed to identify a lot more places. We were growing staff, and we had GMs approaching us saying, oh, I want to build this place called River's Rest. Oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to do that. And we were like, okay, great, but we need to know where to tell these people to put this stuff. We need to understand what it all looks like. So he and I literally sat down on our living room floor with a giant pad of newsprint and started drawing. So we went through some iterations, and all of it was hand drawn. We finally got to a place that we liked, and like he said, there were parts where we just said, you know what are we going to put here? Oh, let's put a forest here. Let's put this desert here, and we'll just call it Sea of Fire.
Yeah.
So a lot of those names were just made up on the spot by the two of us sitting there on the floor trying to figure out what we were going to call things so that we could produce some sort of map that was acceptable to people. Not every detail, not every tiny town, not everything, but just, okay, here's a continent, there's some mountains, there's some deserts, there's some forested areas, here's roughly where the towns that you know about are. And we folded all that up and we sent it to the office, and one of the artists there built it and started, emailed. We went back and forth in email for a while until she had everything tweaked just right. And I guess that map came out in 98?
Somewhere around there.
I think so. Yeah.
It generally, when you look on the wiki today, it's generally what that map is. It's gone through some changes over time, but the original map, the old 96 Australia map.
The bad map.
The bad map. It was really horrible Photoshop skills that I had. It was like overly saturated color and everything else. But,
I'm super impressed with this.
I got it. I was like, no. Here it is. Colored pencils and newsprint and markers. And we're going to do this right.
Yeah. No, I want to see that. That's the one I want to see.
Okay, so fairly quickly, my boss at the time, who was product manager, Fawn, she transitioned me from working just on bard songs and random projects to world building. And that was, I guess, by 97 I was doing that. And that's the bulk of what I did for the rest of my time on staff for the next, 6.5, 7 years, was try to sort of be the one sitting on top with the bird's eye view of everything that everyone was building and making sure that nobody was building on top of each other and all the areas made sense for where they were going, and geographically they made sense, and directionally they made sense, and all of those things, right? it was great fun, and it was also stressful at the same time because, like I said, we were hugely overcrowded and we knew it, and we were trying so hard to do right by all of the people that wanted to come play Gemstone and have fun in it. And the office was like, y'all build as fast as you can, and we were a separate set of pressures at the same time because David decided, for a variety of reasons, that it would be best if the company built a website, had their own presence, had their own subscriptions and all of that stuff, which also created a lot of work for the Game Master staff in terms of supporting all those changes and subscription levels, premium and more game instances, because before we only had one, and suddenly we had, Prime and Plat, and eventually there was Shattered as well, and so on and so forth. So we were under a lot of pressure from a lot of different directions, and it was important to try to split people up so where they could work hard and have somebody sort of keep an eye on where things were going. Other people kept an eye on where things were technically. I kept an eye on where things were fictionally, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it. So during those several years, the big things for me were world building. I cannot tell you, honest to God, I cannot tell you how many thousands of rooms I painted in Gemstone. A lot. I wrote a lot of room text, so much room text, helped other people write room text and QC at other people's room text, and so on and so forth. From 97 to 2000, I was also running events, which was a whole ton of work. As Elysia will tell you, it is a lot of work. We did eventually hire a dedicated SGM for events, and I transitioned that to that person. And from 2000 on to the next 4 years, I was just focused on world building. But as we said earlier, the big thing was that happened in the 2 weeks was we got to get rid of all of these names, these copyright protected, contractually protected names. We've got to get rid of them. That did not help us with history. That did not help us sort of rewrite the world. Where did it come from? Who are these people? What have they been doing for thousands of years? Who are they worshiping exactly? Do they worship? Do they not? Do they, all of that stuff, right? It has to be completely rebuilt from scratch. And so I did, some of it. There were a few other GMs that had special areas of interest. There was somebody that loved gnomes. There was somebody that loved halflings. There was somebody that loved dwarves. And they contributed to those history documents and wrote many of them. The Elven Nations, again, was part of the office pushing us to, we need more space. We've got to be bigger. There's got to be more room for people. And it was really the last big expansion push that we had in the game. We started construction on Ian in 1990, late 98, early 99. And it kind of was off to a slow start, partly because we just didn't have enough people, and partly because at the time I was also still running events, which took an enormous amount of my time. So I was kind of working a full-time job and, working in Gemstone too, and managing events and trying to push this other stuff along. And we were rewriting histories to, come up with new stuff to support Alanthea versus Shadow World stuff. We got the map done in 98. We revealed the map at the 98 SimuCon. I actually still have the transparencies because back then audio-visual was,
Yeah, right.
transparencies on a screen.
Pull out the old overhead projector.
I totally have them. I mean,
Yeah.
I found them in a folder a while back. It was hilarious. About the time that we hired we promoted someone to senior, moved events to them, which was fantastic. I loved events, but I was stretched too thin. We really and we had also increased the number of staff, so we had more people working than we ever had before. And we started really pushing construction. We, started obviously with Viper Shroud. We worked our way west. We waited to open stuff until we had Tall Esteem and most of the hunting areas that are attached to Tall Esteem. A few things came later. I remember opening Wraith and Mist a few weeks later. A couple other things came a little bit later. Creature people needed more time to finish that stuff, but most of it opened, all the way to Tall Esteem on that weekend. It was a lot of work. Lots of people put in so much time and effort on it. I was so impressed with everything that everybody did. So we worked on it. took us about, after we really, really started working on it, year and a half to get all the way to Talesteam, and that was an enormous amount of work. I mean, we had people building, all of that space. We had people on Erek's team building all of those creatures. And, as he said before, we had already, back when we had to add Terrace and Ice Mule, first of all, worked on expanding all of those systems that we all sort of take for granted today. Bank, justice, lockers.
There were no
all
lockers?
Of those basic. Well, there were, but they were only in the
landing. Oh,
landing.
right,
So
right.
All of that work had to be done so that the system could be expanded to as many towns as we wanted to build and function correctly in each place. I got pretty comfortable with a lot of town systems and working in those scripts to update them to handle things that we needed. Built lots and lots of things, tried to get lots and lots of history out. I wish that we had gotten more out. I have so much in notes that never made it to finished documents, which is sad and unfortunate. But
the volume of things that we didn't build that we wanted to build is crazy.
I think that's the story of a lot of creators, right? That you end up building 1,000 things so that you can make one thing,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I also just want to say that I really respect how gently you corrected my mispronunciation of Talesteem. Thank you for that.
Okay, so pronunciations are funny, right? Because we do everything obviously everything in Gemstone is written. Now, back in the 90s when we were still having really big cons, it was easy to go to a con and we would give presentations, and like in 98 when we presented our world map and we for the first time named all of the elven houses and the cities and everything, so those words were being pronounced for people for the first time, they all picked it up and ran with it. But it's been so many years now, and I think a lot of people who play never heard them said out loud,
right?
Never heard them spoken by anyone.
That's my defense, but yeah, continue.
And it's totally cool. I mean, it's fine. It's like we all read novels, and then later you see the author somewhere, and they're like, "Yeah, it's pronounced Hermione."
Oh, that was literally the example I was going to give. In my head,
and all
reading
the American
that book,
readers are like, "It is not."
Yeah, no, I was thinking it's Hermione, and then like when I say it out loud, I'm like, "Oh, that sounds terrible. Why would it be Hermione?"
No, I mean it.
But it totally was in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just how it is. Everybody sort of hears it in their head how they need to hear it in their head. I will say this with naming stuff, because I named a lot of stuff in my time, and many other GMs have named things in Gemstone before and since. Everybody has their own naming philosophy. Everybody sort of goes about it in a different way. For me, it was always kind of, well, first of all, with Zulagoth, I needed to stick with what they started in Terrace, because there is Dwarven lore in Terrace, right? And it's very kind of guttural and lots of consonants, and I needed to stick with that. I also tried to make it such that we went a little nuts with the names that you don't have to say out loud a lot, but things that you do want to say, like Zulagoth tended to be shorter, easier to pronounce than some of the longer Dwarven names, that kind of stuff. The Elven words, I would love to sit here and say that we were able to go out and pull a Tolkien, right, and write a whole language and with its own character set and all that wonderful stuff. But the reality is we work in a text game where we have a character set and we need to use it, and we don't have the option of going that far out there. So the conceit with elves was that their language should sound very lyrical. It should, sort of be different from, we've got humans, which is basically English. We've got halflings, which are also pretty much English. We've got dwarves, which are a little more guttural, more consonant. Then we've got elves, and they're a little more lyrical, a little more musical, a little more, we double up on the vowels here and there, and A&E is sort of a conceit to that. And a lot of the names in Elven nations are just kind of meant to be lyrical twists on English words. Like Silverend is actually Silver's End. You know what I mean? It's not, they weren't meant to be something hugely difficult for people to remember or difficult for them to pronounce if they needed to say it out loud or just to hear it in their head. It just needed to look good and sort of roll out there if you needed to say it. And it was never meant to be hugely difficult. House names, generally speaking, sort of also followed the, well, we want them to sound musical and pretty. This is one of, well, really the oldest mortal race on the planet, right? If you make the argument that Arcadi are immortal, even though we know a couple of them have died. So elves, are the oldest. Sylvans descended from them and so on and so forth. But they've been around forever. We wanted it to sound timeless. We wanted it to be sort of lyrical, musical, and all of the house names reflected the founders. After they sort of came out of the Dark Ages and they were able to sort of begin to loosely organize themselves into tribes, which became houses, the strongest of them, or the ones that were most inspiring, became the founders of the houses. And so the conceit was, well, it's their last name. We'll name the house after them. Elves ruled as they had their own territories and everything, but they also worked together. At the time, there were 7, right? They worked together as one large entity. They had sort of a ruling council in the form of the king and queen of each house, as they titled themselves, worked together to make decisions that were best for all of them. And what was interesting was we were able to say, okay, well, each of these houses has a different strength, right? They're like a different facet of the whole. And so the personality of each one influenced the name of each one, which influenced the look and lore and everything that comes along with them. So, for example, because it's so funny because some people started asking me about this. I had private questions about it in Discord, and then one day public questions in Discord some number of months ago. Illesteam, for example, they are scholars. They love books, right? They love histories. And so if you think about illustrated manuscripts and all of that, that's kind of where their name came from. Each house is that way. So the Valor were historically the warrior tribe of the group, and they were the great protectors. They're in a little bit different place right now, but I have faith that they can pull out of it. Right? Okay.
I don't want to interrupt here, but I'm going to. The only experience I have in Valor is I brought a dark elf wizard there, and
don't do that.
I was like, why is everyone being so mean? And then I was like, oh, I guess I'm just like actually paying attention to what's like the interactions here. But anyway, Valor's a terrible place, and people shouldn't go there. Continue.
It really isn't, and I actually think that they have a huge, giant, enormous, wonderful opportunity in front of them. But I'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
The rest of the names, Loenthra was all about lore and music and art. That house is very focused on creativity. They are one of the two big, well, the only remaining big trading house amongst the elves because the Ashram are gone. They do enormous amounts of luxury good trading out of their ports via both airship and regular ships, water. But Nalfane are they're feign they feign it's malice and trickery, and they are the assassins of the greater body, right? If you think about a country as an entity and all of the different facets that its government and its people might need to keep themselves safe and function correctly, you need an army, you need spies, you need people that do that job.
People to do the dirty work.
Yes, you do, and there you go. You have the Nalfane. You need your artists and your teachers and your lore keepers, and you need your farmers and your tree lovers too. And so you have the Ardenai,
Yeah.
whose name sort of evokes arbors and forests and all those kinds of things. And it's so funny. I was so reluctant because like some of my best friends in the game play Fandral characters, and I was so reluctant to tell them these. Really, so that failed. They're a failure. They failed their house twice with all that magic. Not just once, but twice they failed the elves. And so, and the second time they destroyed a house doing it. So that's very sad. And so, yeah, that's kind of what they got named for. It was interesting because you could sort of define all these individual groups of elves inside the larger group of elves, and who are they and how did they get there, and kind of grow their name out of that. So that was kind of interesting. But Valor, so they were originally, valorous, honorable, the paladins of the elves, right? They were the ones that they were on the front lines of those early battles. They were fighting for everybody, not just their own house, but for all the elves, for everybody. They were the kind of place that all of the other houses would have looked to for protection. They all had their own, standing armies, of course, but they also would have looked to them when it came time to come together. They would have looked to them for that kind of leadership. Nobility might have sent their children to squire over there, et cetera, et cetera. I was really shocked because when we released it, Valor was a newbie town, right? We always intended it to be a newbie town, and it's structured like a newbie town. It has all of the newbie town services, low-level hunting areas, all those great things. When we came back, it had changed. We came back in 2017, and so all of this business of walls and guards and papers and all of this, I was like, what happened here?
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah.
so, some of my friends filled me in on some of the role play that had occurred while we were gone. And I guess I feel like kind of where they are right now is whatever they've been through has made them turn and withdraw. They're very withdrawn. They're hiding behind their walls and they've locked the doors. And that's a little sad, but I feel like they have this huge opportunity to change and grow. Does that make sense? And I don't know if they want to, and I don't know. I don't have any, I don't work on Gemstone anymore. I have no insight into anything to do with any plans or future storylines or anything. I just look at it and I see, oh gosh, what a great thing it would be to have that. I said this to someone the other day too, with reference to Valor. It's like, Valor is in the place right now that Gondor was.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Before Aragon became king and saved, humanity and led them all out of the darkness. That's kind of where they are right now. I honestly am not sure how to answer the question. If someone else needed them right now, would they be there? You know what I mean?
Not if they were a dark elf, I'll tell you that much.
Not if they were a dark elf. To be fair, none of the elven houses are terribly fond of dark elves. Although at release, the only penalty that dark elves paid for being in elven nations was trading. Otherwise, a lot of the names in elven nations were puns or, like twists on words. Wraith and Mist is myths writhed, right? It's tendrils of... literally, it's an area full of undead and ghosts, and it was a village with a terrible tragedy, and this is what's left, and you've got all this mist rolling off the lake, and it's spooky, and
So give us some more examples of that.
Like near Tafar Forest, for example.
Yeah.
You start at near the city and you walk to the far side. I'm serious.
All right, that one is a little less clever.
They were meant to be. But they were meant to be cute and punny, especially in areas like near Tafar and Toadwort, where it was a new player city, and you knew that people who didn't know anything about Gemstone were going to come out of the character manager there, and need to find a place if you wanted them to stay. And so, places like Toadwort, it's a swamp, and I was like, I gotta have a cute name for this place.
Right.
It needs to be engaging. It needs to make people interested in something that's called Toadwort,
Yeah.
So a lot of the names came from places like that, just trying to engage people and make them interested in it.
So, having been around when Gemstone went through this tumultuous and unexpected and very sudden change and explosive period of growth, and then stepping away for 15 years and then coming back with all these changes that have been put in place, both to the things that you were familiar with and that you knew really well because you either had a hand in helping to make them or you were really familiar with them, and then there were just things that got added on, right? Like Lich is now this ubiquitous presence in the game that was certainly not around 20 years ago. So I'm curious to know how Gemstone feels different to the two of you now. It's the same game, same name, but how does it feel to you coming back and having been here for a bit?
So, it's both the same and new and refreshing at the same time, right? Because, like I said, the core is still the same, the core engine and whatnot. But what I've really enjoyed coming back to it after so long is suddenly you get to see all the new things at once rather than having to live them on the journey. So in other words, one of the things that blows my mind even still after a couple of years being back is all of the ways in which you can say things and
Right.
add tone and verbiage and inflection in ways that we could never ever do before. In the early 90s, we used to put smiley emojis on the back of our sentences
Oh,
so
man.
that people understood we were joking, because it was wild. And I remember over time that became a no. But now you can speak and show people exactly what tone you mean to convey. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So if you take that and look at it in terms of every other change that has occurred, to flesh out the game engine in such a way that it becomes much more personal, in a way that however you want to express yourself, you can, through clever use of verbs and or fluff items that have zests on them and whatever else. Okay, we'll go back to chairs just
Yes.
for a moment. Just for a moment.
That's,
He
no, man.
really loves his new
Okay.
chair, like a
Okay.
lot.
My chair is awesome.
A
But
lot.
anyway, I'm just going to say one thing about the chairs. If you had released a chair as it exists today, back in, call it 96, 97, it would have been an auction quality item.
And there would have only been one.
Yeah, because we didn't have time to do that stuff. This stuff that we get today is awesome because our pressures that we were faced with was all about growing the game, making sure that we had livable space, making sure that we could keep pace with the level advancement and everything else. And that set of pressure is very different today because sure, you have a population at cap and they want extra things to do, but at the same time, you don't necessarily have to grow the geography of the product to do that. And so you can spend time with extreme personalization and tonal systems and things that seem as silly as chairs, but actually it can be hyper customized to however the way you want them. That's awesome, and that could never have existed back then because there was just no time for it, sadly, as much as many GMs as we had things to do. But the pressure was all about growth, and now the pressures are very different. This is more all about how to make that experience more personal. So I think that's the thing that gets me the most, having come back, and I get the benefit of all of those years of that kind of development and be able to exist in a game that's fleshed out way more than we could have done it from its core product. Obviously, I look back and think of all the things that we built to allow for that to occur, because the pressure of the sprawl had to get taken care of. Well, that's not a problem anymore. So you can actually spend a lot more time thinking about, well, how do I want my character to be, and what do I want him to look like, and how do I want him to talk and act and have a personality, versus where am I going to hunt next?
All the different things that you can do now are fabulous, and all of the creativity that people poured in over the last dozen years or so into things like climate wear and chairs and lapidary boxes and clothing and all of these wonderful things that we just didn't have back then. They're great fun. They're great fun to play with. They're great fun to collect. They're, like, I was making quills today with nibs and feathers from Evansgate, and it was awesome. And I texted somebody a big list of quills and said, "Thank you so much for all of these because I love them. They're great."
Right. Yeah.
I have to have a locker full of quills soon. The amount of creativity that is afforded to us now as players is so much greater than it was back then, when the only real creativity that you had was maybe getting lucky and winning a merchant spot to get a long description added to your item, for example.
Yeah.
There is so much more available now, and it's wonderful. It's great to be able to do things.
I just think it's interesting to think about the development and the focus shifting from expansion to personalization, which sounds right to me. But it's also interesting because I feel like they're not building new things, they're not adding new areas, and it's like, well, they are, it's just not in the physical sense that you mean that, right? Like they're not building
Well,
another city because they don't need another city right now.
right. We don't need another city. And I do think that obviously they build combat related activities. They do things like Dusk Ruin and
Yeah.
the arena they just put in at Evans Gate and different things that are there for people to play with for limited times during the year. I'm not at CAP. I have a lot of friends that are at CAP, and I get what they're saying about it gets really boring after 6 months or a year or 2 years to be hunting in the same limited selection of places. I totally get that. It's one of my personal worries and fears that, God, what's going to happen when I get to CAP? Am I going to get bored with that? And I genuinely don't know. I mean, I worry that I would, but Eric and I have been in no hurry to get there partially because of that. It's like, well, we're not really sure. Would we get really tired of doing things like hunting the confluence over and over? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I will say this. Creature design is hard. The more abilities that the character has to use against the creature make it exponentially harder. And when you're talking about capped people who maybe don't just have, for example, great gear and all of their spells, they have all of this other stuff because they've been capped forever and they've earned all this experience and they've learned all these other skills that at a lower level they would have had to choose between, and now they have them all, and so on and so forth. It's not easy. It is not easy at all. So I get it. I hope that they're working on it though, but I do get it. It is hard.
Yeah.
The higher the level, the harder it is. It's like Eric said earlier, this was a 20 level game, and then when we had to stretch it. I mean, he could speak more to the math of that, but it's a miracle it works.
No, it really is. Sometimes I sit back. So my spouse does not play Gemstone. She actually is not she doesn't really play games at all, which I think it's sort of a yin yang thing. But sometimes I'll just be, we'll be in bed and she'll be watching something on TV or whatever, and I'll be playing Gemstone, and I'll just kind of laugh to think like I'm playing this game that I started playing 21 years ago, and I'm still playing it with all these other people who are still playing it. And I Gemstone, I think, just should not exist, except for like
kind of
the like ferocious determination of this small group of players that just play it for like beyond reason. And I think it's great. I'm not knocking the game. Like I enjoy it, right? But it's just funny. Sometimes I just laugh that it's still a thing.
I think what most of us get out of Gemstone is something we can't get anywhere else.
Oh, that's absolutely true.
No game that can provide you the level of personalization that you can get in Gemstone.
Yeah.
There just isn't.
There is another thing, and I remember remarking about this way back in the late 90s as we were growing into AOL. It was about how communities form. Especially as the game got larger and we were getting not 200 people but 2,000 people in the product, you would get sub-communities. And so when I look at the community today, especially with the advent of things like Discord and being able to chat outside of the game and on your phone and or not even in the game at all and still be able to be connected to the community of people that are playing alongside you, as long as Gemstone's able to run, I'm sure they will have players.
Yeah.
Because of that, we will at least work continues on the game as it is now. We will at least have, I think, this level of community that we have. Whether it grows or not, it may not be necessary, but it is definitely the whole. When you get back to the why do you play Gemstone still, it's largely because of the community of people that are here.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, Erek and Elysia, thank you so much for coming on Town Square Central to talk with us today. I learned a ton, and I really appreciate you all giving up your time to talk.
And thank you. Hopefully we didn't bore everybody.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I'll talk to y'all soon. Names are the glue that holds this game together. When someone names a creature or a place or a player, we've built this shared understanding of what they mean. The Shan, the Shelfay, the Raging Thrak, Icefield Trace, the Rift. These names live in our collective consciousness. And this is, in itself, pretty amazing that this invented world keeps snowballing forward with the tumult of different stories roiling around inside of it. But there are some names that we keep quietly alive, the ones only we know that everybody else, with decades having passed by, have forgotten. I think about the players I knew years ago that nobody else remembers. There was Tyrion, the kid exactly my age who lived all the way across the country that I used to chat with every day after school about girls and Gemstone and homework and how much he loved marching band, and I think about him from time to time. I wonder what he's doing. I wonder if he thinks about me. And then there are the names that we want to remember but can't. Like the guy I knew years ago who was a first responder in New York City when 9/11 happened. He told me all about how he'd run into the buildings with the dust everywhere to help people, and how months later he started getting sick, he thought, because of that dust. And he was playing less and less until one day he was gone. And it might have been bullshit, because a lot of stuff on the internet is bullshit, but he's not around anymore, so I can't ask him. And I can't even remember his name to find out whether anyone knows what happened to him. All he is to me now is the idea of a name, the ghost of a name that I used to know. And of course, one day, my name will be a ghost too. All of our names will.
Hello, my character's name is Noldi, Noldi. He is a dwarf. My name is Nolan, Nolan. Basically, from the reading of Tolkien's trilogy, Noldi sounded like a typical dwarven name based on my own personal name. So that's how I named my character, and he's been my primary character for, ever since AOL picked up Gemstone. And that's my story. Thanks, bye.
In 1970, Michael Moorcock wrote a book called The Eternal Champion. And in that book, the protagonist was a character by the name of Erek and Elysia, who was an embodiment of the Eternal Champion. And he also wrote the Elric novels. So in late 70s, early 80s, I used to play a lot of D&D, and I tended to use that name. But I didn't want to necessarily join Gemstone and use that entire name and be a book character. So I just shortened it to Erek. But I've been using that name since I was a kid. And like most people who are young and want to use a name that is they identify with a book character, it just stuck. And so, I'll probably continue to use it for a long time. But nobody really knows that that's really why I have it. But it's a good way for me to identify with a book character and not actually be the character's exact name.
I would say probably most of the people that play Gemstone, avid fantasy reader, always was, love fantasy novels, cannot get enough of them. I had a couple of characters that I named after characters from the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series, and Elysia the name Elysia came from that book. It's not actually a character in the book. It's used in a swear. I think it's some sort of deity or something that people would swear on, and somehow stuck in my brain. And so when I was rolling up the character in Gemstone, that's what I typed in, and it was free, and available. So there you go.
Hi, Milax. EK here. Most people know me from playing Alistair on Prime. However, my other main character is the Princess Galazil, who is a mage and an enlightened one, currently stranded in Elysia as a result of some rather interesting time paradoxes. She's had some trials and tribulations, but for the most part, she's fitting in nicely among her compatriots. And yes, her name and entire character concept is derived utterly from the wonderful Super Nintendo classic Chrono Trigger. But don't worry, no bad names here. It's all fun and games unshattered.
So, Namit, some people pronounce it Namit, which is wrong. It doesn't rhyme with dammit. It rhymes with Namit, as in comet or vomit. In the real world, it would be pronounced Nami. It is a Hebrew name, which means bird. Namit's full name is Namit DMVMD Bragiani. The DMVMD stand for Zash, which was her master long ago, Monica, her mother, V for Tabat Belkirin, which was her first husband. The next M is for Raviko Mawani, her second husband, and D, which is Harfarderdin, her third. Bragiani is the name of her father, or her father's last name, rather.
So, Namit sent me to leave this voice message and tell you the origin of my name. Well, the truth is I misread it in another bard guide, and that's how I arrived at Theron. But we could go with the more interesting etymology of it and look at what the name actually means, which I actually come up with retroactively. But it would mean to one who runs from the Fae, or knight of the Fae, or if we want to go with the colloquial Irish synonym for Fae was the doomed, so one who runs from his doom, or the final period on a song about doom. And that is what Therian means. Thanks.
Hi, Milax. This is Leifa, or the player of Leifa. I'm calling you to submit an episode about names. I love to tell the story of my character's name because it's often quite misinterpreted, and I think it's interesting how it is and how it's evolved. Currently, my character's name is Leifa Aranya Fendro. Leifa was born to me in 1995. She's actually my very first character. My brother, my real-life brother, told me, hey, there's this great game, D&D based. You'll love it. Let's play it together. It's called Gemstone. And his first character, or his character at the time, when I started to play with him, name was Daffyd Stagsvine. And Daffyd was a Gaelic version of my brother's real name, David. And Stagsvine he chose because he was just staying kind of with that track of Gaelic, sort of Nordic, that whole wintry idea of D&D. So I decided to build a character that was his sister in the game. But at that time, there wasn't a way to use the same family name, a surname. You had to have a unique surname as well as your first name. So I chose the name Leifa based off of Leif Erikson, who I always found interesting in history. So I just added the A to make that a feminine version, Leif, with an A at the end. And then because Stagsvine couldn't be my last name, I went with Stagsweed, because it's just to go along with the joke of vines and weeds after stags. So Leifa was originally a warrior, and Leifa Stagsweed was her name. Within the first year of playing, I changed her name I changed her profession to Ranger. Suddenly, her name had more significance, at least to others, and people read her name as Leifa. So my name in-game became Leifa Stagsweed, and it was the source of many jokes. And I even jumped in on the jokes and played along to a degree as well. So that's basically the story of how Leifa got her name originally as my character evolved and started to have some realization of what a dark elf was, what being a Fandral elf was. So I did change her surname. Her surname now is actually a play on a Hungarian word which means sunshine. So now her name is actually kind of Leifa Sunshine, but it is Aranya, and she is a noble Fandral and member of the Fandral Enclave, and she has left behind those Nordic roots as much as she can. Her name is pronounced Leifa, Lay-Fuh, phonetically. Thanks for doing this podcast. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hello, my name is Ryan. I am GS4 Rogue on the forums. The name of my character is Eleftheros. Eleftheros means free in ancient Greek. The reason why I chose that name is because I think gemstones should be free. I sell enough silvers every month to make gemstone free for me to play and make a profit. So that's the story of my name. All right, thanks very much, and hope you have a good night. Bye-bye.
The first son of Deuteronomy of Gath?
Yes.
You have been found guilty by the elders of the town of uttering the name of our Lord, and so as a blasphemer, you are to be stoned